Over 200,000 youth enter the adult criminal justice system each year, and 10,000 juveniles are housed in adult-only prisons. I chose this topic because it really frustrates me that people younger than me make dumb mistakes and get the full maximum penalty for it. I've researched about this topic for hours before writing about it, and I have a friend locked up, so this really does motivate me to speak up because I see it firsthand. Instead of sending young adults to adult prisons, we should evaluate what went wrong in their life and help them throughout their conflicts so in the future they can help themselves. First, I will be talking about why it's bad for teens to be in adult prisons and how they get put into adult prisons. And finally, what we can do to stop them from going to adult prisons. Teens being in adult prisons can easily be misguided by older inmates because they have no father figure to look up to. Most juveniles tried as adults are being denied education or are being exposed to various dangers. The majority of states are finally starting to see that it's getting out of control, so they're starting to pass reforms in order to make it more difficult to prosecute juveniles as adults. Between 1990 and 2010, the number of juveniles in adult jails went up nearly 230%. Most of the juveniles in adult prison are awaiting trial as before they are tried. There are many federal and state laws that grant all juveniles the right to education, but since they go to adult prison, they lose this right because they do not have access to any education. A 2005 survey made by Caroline Wolf Harlow, who works for the U.S. Department of Justice, found that 40% of the jails and prisons had no educational services at all. This to me is very wrong because it's enabling young adults to live a life of crime since they are incompetent. The other dangers other than education are youth in the adult system who are at more risk for sexual victimization. Youth in the adult system are addressed to more mentally harmful practices and have less help in adult prisons compared to the juvenile systems. In a 2009 report by the National Prison Rape Elimination Commission found that more than any other group of incarcerated people, youth incarcerated with adults are probably at the highest risk of getting raped. Now that we have talked about why it's bad for juveniles to be tried as adults, we will now talk about how to get into adult prisons. Almost every state now allows for youth under the age of 18 to be tried as adults. There are 3 common ways for juveniles to be transferred to adult prisons. The first is a judicial waiver, which means some states give all the power to the judge for him or her to decide the well-being of the juvenile. The second way is a direct file, which gives prosecutors the power to decide if the juvenile will be tried as an adult. Finally, the last way is called a statutory exclusion, in which they base it off the seriousness of the crime and the juvenile's record. In my opinion, the only juveniles should be tried as adults are with the statutory exclusion. Also, in some states, if you were previously tried as an adult, you'll always be tried as an adult. Once an adult, always an adult. In 2005, the Daily Progress newspaper in Charlottesville, Virginia, reported that a 15-year-old boy was put into adult jail awaiting trial. The youth was placed in the same cell as a man convicted of sexual battery against a minor. This right here shows how screwed up the prison system really is. Lucy Wallace, who's a BBC reporter, writes about brain changes in 2013, and she says, neuroscience has shown that a young person's cognitive development continues in the later stage, and their emotional maturity, self-image, and judgment will be affected until the prefrontal cortex has been fully developed. Research shows that a person's brain does not stop growing to the age of 25. But yet young adults are being tried and yet end up getting the harshest sentences even though their brains are yet to be developed. Even though the crimes have to be violent for them to be tried, is it fair for us to send them away with older criminals? Judges can send juveniles to adult court just from the background, juvenile court record, and their willingness to get treatment in the juvie system. According to a 2007 nationwide poll commissioned by the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, 89% of Americans believe that rehabilitative services and treatment for incarcerated youth can help prevent future crime. Now that we have talked about the ways juveniles go to adult prison, we are going to talk about the ways to stop them from going. In order for juveniles to stop going to adult prison, we have to recognize and serve them with specialized needs. Research shows that youths involved with the juvenile system usually have at least one mental or substance abuse. Youths with mental disorders who are exposed to stress, trauma, and serious harms in the adult prisons are far more likely to inflict suicide upon themselves. In order to have less teens tried as adults, we will need to get more mental services in the jails and prisons. Another way to find a solution is we can reduce institutionalization in younger people, unless of course if it's completely necessary. Teens should never be placed in a facility just because of a family situation or social service needs. Teens who are placed in large group facilities are not justified of treatment for when they are released. They are usually misguided by other individuals and gangs to get them back at the same place they were just in. So, in order possibly to stop this, we'll need to have small confinement facilities. The facilities that juveniles need to be held in have to be humane, developed appropriately, have culturally competent, and also geared towards positive youth outcomes. These positive youth outcomes can help them get a job after getting free, or simply just keeping them clean and out of trouble. Other ways to stop youths from getting tried as adults would be to improve aftercare and reentry, creating a range of effective community-based programs, and finally eliminating racial and ethnic imbalance. If we can do all this, you will see those percentages of young adults going to prison way lower. Finally, now that we have talked about struggles juveniles face, we will now review. Rehabilitating a juvenile is not easy and it does take a lot of work, but if we get the right people in location for this, it is possible. I first talked about how young adults are in prison, then how they got into prison, and finally the solution we can make for them to stop coming back. Instead of locking up kids with adults, we need a better alternative, so when they are free they can live a better and happier life. Thank you.